Okay, so we're just missing Michael.
Not coming. That's right. Of course. Michael is not coming today. I don't know.
There's someone else.
Colin. Well, I guess it must be Colin.
Colin. I was like, we're definitely not all here.
Yeah.
I
think he was gonna be here.
So
I think we were down to five.
said we were gonna be five.
Okay.
Okay.
Good.
I knew Michael. I didn't know Colin.
Oh yeah. No Michael, no Colin. I have it written down too. And then we're missing Donna at the next meeting, and Helen will be online.
Right.
Okay. Great. So we can get started. Happy Thanksgiving week, everyone. So the emergency exits are at the back of the room and then down the hall in either direction. Do we have any agenda changes? Okay, we'll keep it as is. Open to the public for items not related to the agenda. Does anyone have anything in the room? Nothing in the room. Anything online? If you do something online, you can unmute and turn your video on. We are not using the chat. Okay, then announcements. Does anyone have any announcements?
I have more of a question announcement. I was just wondering if anybody had a chance to go to the Vermont Development Conference. I think it was last week.
I did.
Maybe you can give us a little summary with your city
Sure.
board.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, actually, Jesse, Alana, Paul, and I all went to,
Wow.
so there was a good South Burlington contingent this time around. Yeah. So happy to report that there were a good number of other planning staff from other municipalities as well, which my understanding is it hasn't been always true in the past. And a lot of good different sessions about different challenges the development community is facing, how they're working around what they can work around, the challenges in financing that they're running into, some other sessions of things that we are very familiar with about, Act 181 and Act 47 and the future of Act 250. And some interesting ideas from other places, people who've done work in Lewiston, Maine, that has some similarities to the Chittenden County area, some dramatic differences, but other similarities, and came away with a lot of good ideas and meeting some people from other places and developers and financiers and lawyers and all sorts of people. So worthwhile to go there. The development community is definitely facing the struggles that we all know about. And one of the primary is currently interest rates. The labor market has rebounded to a pretty significant extent to where it was pre-COVID in many sectors, including a lot of the construction and labor fields. But they're running into a lot of issues with financing because it just costs a lot more money to buy money at this point.
Did they mention anything in terms of immigration or some of the policies that the new president plans to do?
No, the keynote was focused more on technology and the sort of changing role of technology and, from AI to sort of mechanical robotics and what the roles could be in construction. And then the other speakers and things had been scheduled, well in advance of the election. So wasn't really any direct talk about that.
It would just be conjecture anyway.
There's some conjecture. They'll have some thoughts. Yeah. There were some questions raised in some sessions when a project that was being described was reliant on a federal program or federal funding through a grant or something else. And there were members of the audience who asked well, what's the outlook on this kind of project being able to go forward in the future because of changes to federal structures and funding opportunities, and there weren't really any answers because there aren't at this point.
Thank you.
Okay, any other announcements? Do you have additional staff items?
The only thing I wanted to just highlight is that the LDR amendments that were approved by City Council are now fully effective as of yesterday. So so that's, past the appeal period and past, some of these other things, for the effective date of the amendments. Related to that, we are finalizing the new PDFs of everything and the new maps and getting that all together. That should be posted before Thanksgiving, hopefully, technology willing. But just to know that those new versions of the LDRs are being put together in a nice formatted, easy to use, hyperlinked version. And that's about it. Happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah, just related to your last announcement, I just wondered if, because I don't think the general public has any real knowledge of what the changes in the LDRs were and what effect that has on development. I was talking to a young fellow, I spent hours at the Xfinity store and, and this guy just mentioned, he says, oh, it's like, my girlfriend and I, want to build a house or buy a house in the, within the next 3 years or something. And, plan to like have shared, space or something so we can afford this thing. And I started talking to him and I said, well, you don't have to go to Barry to do this, because he's like, oh, we need something that's like 350,000. And I said, yeah, that's tough to get here, but an older house. And if you find something with a larger piece of property, you can build a second house or even, more than, you can build up to 4 units on that property now. And it's just like, not a lot of people know this. He said, really? His father happens to own a pretty prominent store on Shelburne Road. What?
Siri might think you're talking to her.
My,
Well, I think that's really interesting.
but it was very interesting. And I just thought, for people like, him and, young people are thinking, I have no chance at housing here, but who potentially have parents who can help finance some of this for them. It's like, these are people that we should be helping educate about what the possibilities are
Yeah.
of development in existing, urban and suburban settings.
Yeah, so that just reminded me, the other thing to highlight from the city council is that they did pass the resolution to reorganize the housing committee. So the Affordable Housing Committee and the Housing Trust Fund Committee have now been combined into a new housing committee with a slightly different, broader mandate than either of the previous bodies had before, and a reduced total number of people. It was was a total of 13 for those two committees, and now it's 7 for the new housing committee. I only raise that because one of the bullet points in the project, in the charge for the housing committee, is some of this public outreach and education work. So that'll be part of their mandate, supported by staff, obviously, but I am hopeful that when that body kind of gets rolling, we will be able to do some things like that. And tied with that, we're also on the wrapping up stages of the equity and planning outreach toolkit project. So using some new ideas and some new tools from the toolkit, relaunching the housing committee with a slightly different mandate, and moving into those processes, I think will hopefully in the next 6 months to a year at the outside be seeing a lot more plain language public outreach on things like LDR amendments and what's going on at the planning commission and things like that.
It sounds wonderful. It's a great idea, Donna. And
Yeah, we should kind of work with the
Yeah.
housing committee, to, just to help them understand what the possibilities are, because I'm not even sure if many of them know, like, what can you do with it? Say you have a 3/4 acre lot,
Yep.
with one little house on the
Yeah,
front of it.
I will say I staff the housing committee, so I'm their staff resource. So it's sort of my role in this is being able to bring some of that knowledge and not necessarily use planning commission resources, because you're all volunteers and have limited time. Tapping into staff capacity to do some of that channeling.
Yeah, great idea. Yeah, especially with things that I think people think of doing things that they're used to seeing. So
Mhm.
some of the accessory dwellings or tiny house in the backyard or things that might be really like desirable to somebody is maybe they don't see it around a lot yet, so they don't think it's even an option.
Right.
So,
Yep.
great idea.
Do you think one of the outcomes for the new housing committee might be developing, certainly with the planning department, sort of a how-to or a manual on, you know, what these changes mean to you, or how can
Mhm.
you think differently about
Yep.
finding housing or building it, or
Yeah, so in a broad, so the resolution that was passed by city council was the um charge for the committee, so it's sort of a perennial charge, not tied to any particular work item. But I would say that that sort of work and that sort of resource is something that would fall under their broad purpose of policy advising and education and outreach.
I
Yeah.
think that would be really helpful.
Are we ready to move into the active transportation plan? Okay, so we are going to hear a presentation on the current status of the active transportation plan.
Sorry, just before we get any farther, I just want to make sure Sue or Elizabeth, and Erica, can you confirm that you hear us all right? In the room, it sounds like I'm much louder than others, but if you can hear everybody, then I don't need to adjust anything and I'm just loud.
We can hear you.
Everything's fine.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Is she louder than others? Is that a thing?
I think I'm just closer to the microphone.
Oh,
I've been like doing this and I'm testifying in front of Congress. And I don't need to.
Kelsey is quite good at testifying. I'm gonna say. I've seen her in action. Let's see. So Nick and Erica, are you gonna?
Yeah,
Take
we
us
can,
away?
we can talk about this for a
Okay.
bit, for sure.
I might have missed it, but Erica, have you spoken with us in the past?
I don't think I have. I know a
Yeah.
couple of you,
Maybe you
but
can
I'm
introduce yourself.
yeah. Hi, Donna. I'm Erica Quallen, Deputy Director of Capital Projects. I sit over at Public Works, manage a lot of our transportation and bike ped projects, and I've been serving as the city project manager on the active transportation plan and also staff the bike ped committee.
Nick, you can introduce yourself too. I know we see you a little more often, but
Appreciate that. I'm Nick Atherton, city planner, and I've been liaising with the from that department to the active transportation plan, which is made up of representatives from the city, but also the CCRPC and the contractor VHB. But yeah, so Erica, we didn't really talk about who was going to take the lead on bring us up to speed. Erica, would you want to bring us up to speed, or do you want me to do the background?
I can give a brief rundown of it, and then Nick, if you have specifics, like topics of discussion or things you were looking to get from the Planning Commission this evening, then you can take it from there.
Sounds
Um,
great. Yeah.
But so this was a CCRPC UPWP project, which I saw is also on your agenda for the next round. And we've been working with the consultant VHB. We're at just over a year of effort in this project. We've had a lot of robust public outreach, 3 very successful open house / public meetings, and a really a very successful outreach survey also. I was impressed with how many people engaged with that, so it was great. And this project is one of the primary purposes, if you haven't been following it, is to plan out the next 3 to 25 years of particularly capital projects that will be needed to build out our bike ped network. So looking at what we have, what amenities and services are around the city, transit lines, and how do we connect all of these things through a safe, active transportation network. So that looks at identifying proximity to different things, if it's close to a school, if it's close to high density places where there's going to be a lot of people going to or coming from, and looking at how we could close those gaps, and then based on the type of road it is near, determining which type of facility would be most appropriate. Are bike lanes okay, or does it need to be a shared use path? And then all of those are evaluated using, I think it's 6 kind of heading criteria. I don't have the list in front of me. And they all have different weighted points assigned to them to try to keep it really objective where we can, because it is very much a mix of an art and a science. And so that's really the science piece of it. And we're now into the kind of art piece of it. We're looking at what that scoring laid out for us in terms of priorities. Does that kind of, does that mesh with what we're hearing from other people, and what we have historically seen as the priority, and where the neighborhoods are changing? So does that all actually make sense? And the kind of complementary part to it is suggested programs and policies. And that is very much the subjective piece of the consultant. And our project team did a lot of research on other municipalities that are similar, some are very different, to South Burlington, and looking at what policies other places have tried. And some of them are bolstering and supporting existing efforts like Safe Routes to School, to make sure that we continue that effort. Recommending looking at our speed limits throughout the city, different educational efforts, how we could work with schools, a lot of different program and policy recommendations from there. So where we're at right now is the project list is being refined after our first round of prioritization. We heard some comments from the third public meeting and some conversations with counselors. And so we're doing those revisions right now. And the draft plan will be presented to council February 3rd, their first meeting of February. And so right now we're really in that kind of just the like final massaging of things and all of our gut checks. And so we're looking to people like you all who take a specific look at the city through your experience, and how we can make sure that things are laid out properly. Nick, did you want to add anything there?
Thanks, Erica. Appreciate it. Yeah, so the purpose of bringing this on the agenda tonight was to bring you folks up to speed in case you haven't had a chance to visit the public the open houses that we've had along the way, and to allow for any questions while we're still in this feedback gathering and reconfiguring phase before we make final recommendations and publish the results. Just to get a little bit into the weeds of some of what that feedback was and where we've been, what we've been doing with this sort of final phase. A lot of the feedback that we heard during this final public meeting, some of the folks here tonight were actually in attendance, was about some broader questions. There were a couple of specific items and also some sort of broader stuff. One of the specific items was that brought to attention something a little bit that we saw elsewhere in the plan, was the treatment of Heinsberg Road as one single section. Due to some of the scoring, Erica alluded to like a weighting system, basically. Due to some of the way that those variables were weighted, Heinsberg Road actually popped up in this ranking system as being the highest priority for adding separated bike facilities along. Now, that actually may be the appropriate treatment for it in certain sections, but it's a pretty long length of road that services much less densely populated, much of which services much less densely populated parts of South Burlington than, let's say, Shelburne Road, Williston Road, Dorset Street. And so that was sort of the gut check, the art and the science of what Erica was referring to. We had to kind of look at that and say, okay, there may be sections where this recommendation is indeed the correct thing, but it might not be the case. And we heard from members of the public, that to this effect, that that a fully separated bike path along the entirety of Heinsberg Road from city limit to city limit may not be the flagship project that South Burlington wants to put all of its capital funds into, above everything else. So this is after all a matter of ranking, balance, and pulling in multiple variables to make a pretty complex set of decisions over a period of decades. So out of that particular example came the decision to split a number of these corridors into sections and then weight the population density along those sections and view those as individual projects. And that allowed for just a little bit more nuance in how we were looking at some of these sections that definitely need treatment of some kind for various reasons, but may not necessarily need either the same treatment or the same consistent treatment along their entire length. The other two pieces of major feedback that came up were that folks wanted to see more exploration of some things that had been ranked on the official, that listed on the official map, but had not been considered sort of shovel ready capital funds ready projects in the original ranking. So those were given the same treatment as Heinsberg Road, looked at as sections and added to the ranking, to the potential project ranking. So those will be included in the final draft. And those specifically are a couple of the corridor options that parallel Shelburne Road or are located on Shelburne Road themselves, as well as some planned bike paths to the east of Veterans Memorial Park. And I can actually pull up the official map real fast to to show what it is I'm referring to there. But does anyone have any questions after what I've laid on the table?
Donna?
Yeah, I think two questions, because we talk a lot about, adding pedestrian facilities, but I wonder how this ties in with transit. And related to transit and how people can use transit, it applies, seems to me, most applicable to people who are who do the same routes every day and who currently drive. And how do we make it easier for people to get from, say they live in Butler Farms and they go to the hospital every day.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, our director of, or the head of our bike and ped committee actually does do that, and she bikes a lot of the time.
Right.
But there's no busway. There's no way to do it on a bus.
Yeah.
And it just seems like, there's sort of this missing link, which is tying active transportation to parking, employment and parking policies and transit at the same time. Because, we have a problem right now because we're losing transit because not enough people take it, but people don't take it because they can park. Or, or maybe they carpool instead of transit, it's like, and I think that the whole plan, my conception when I heard about this plan was that this is great. We're going to have some real actionable measures to do here that will actually limit the number of cars, driving into, center of Burlington and South Burlington. But I don't see that really happening with this, where it is right now. And I see that there's a second stage. And I guess it's just the architect in me. I just don't like the slow speed that this is going to take for anything to really happen. And, and I'd love to focus more on employers and, helping them, as some people are already doing, but make it easier for those people who want to encourage transit use and bike ped use and stuff to get to work. Just make it easier for those people and focus on those projects to really, help make those things happen. I just want more action and less planning, not less planning, but I want the planning to result in something a lot closer term then what I see is, I mean, I've been on Bike Ped for like, what, 15 years? Not a ton of, there's been things that have happened. It's been great, but not nearly fast enough. So that's kind of my comment. My general comment is just like, pull this together and make something happen. Pretty demanding, huh?
Erica, do you want to add anything about how this plan will feed into your work in the capital improvement plan and DPW's prioritization of different projects?
Yeah, absolutely. Because there are a lot of different places that recommendations are coming from the active transportation plan, Safe Routes to School, our sidewalk assessment, and those do range in timeline. So the active transportation plan, you're right, Donna, it's pretty long range, the large scale projects. And when that list gets finalized, some of them I think really will be quicker hitting of improving so putting in some crosswalks at much needed intersections and closing some of those smaller gaps. But the other efforts, particularly the sidewalk assessment, we're already starting to plan how to use that and looking at doing a single project that covers our crosswalk ramps around the city using that data, because now we know exactly where we have certain needs and where we don't, so that we can the things that can be done quickly, we are planning to do that in the most effective way. We've started to with the funding sources increasing, because they are very different funding sources. Penny for Paths can help a lot with, and has helped a lot with, the larger projects, which are unfortunately slow by the nature of the process that is needed for those. But a lot of this, I think, is going to result in much quicker responses to things, because we'll have a more comprehensive picture of what needs to be done and have better estimates of costs and yeah, just be able to make a more efficient kind of plan of attack. But I hear you. I wish I wish a lot of my projects could go faster too. And just one thing about the transit, transit was one of our metrics in connectivity and proximity to transit, and things that were within a quarter mile of transit got quite a few of those points in the weighted measure, and connectivity was one of the highest weighted categories on that part of it. So, but yeah, I think first and last mile is a great place to put additional effort into.
Yeah, I will also note that the example of what I was talking about with adding some of the stuff from that had been on the official map but hadn't been considered, capital funds ready projects at the start of the plan, adding that towards the end. Just simply that act of sort of uniting all of these particular projects that are at various stages of completion, whether that's just an idea or a line on the official map, all the way to we're actually acquiring right of way for the bike ped bridge or something like that. Having those all united in one single document that, we as staff and you folks as members of the community and representatives of the community, our elected officials and the public can all reference at once and be literally reading from the same page. That's one of the main value props of what we're doing here. And it's been very successful in doing that. And we're already, and what it's already allowing us to do is to start comparing those on an even footing. And like Erica said, plan it out in the most efficient way so that once once we start issuing bids, those bids can be followed up quickly and they can go straight to shovel ready. And I say that as someone who every day rides twice along a section that is scoped already for a bike ped project, and who dearly wishes it was already there.
Yeah.
And just the last thing, from the broader planning perspective, like Erica and Nick have been very tight to this project, and they're the experts on the ATP itself. I just wanted to point out that the question of transit and transit service in Chittenden County is a much broader one. And having this kind of document that we've put together in South Burlington, prioritizing connectivity, prioritizing where walkability and bikeability is easier, like from current transit stops or current corridors to employers and schools and other facilities, is a real chip that South Burlington can use in the discussions with GMT and with the state and with regional partners in transit, to sort of show that we've done the background work, that, you know, we've planned for how South Burlington can support a walk bike network that, as Erica, I think Erica said, first mile and last mile from those transit stops. How do people get from the transit stops to where they're trying to go? So we can show the municipal work. It's something that we can bring to the table when discussions are being had, and Paul is our lead on those discussions. Discussions are being had about GMT and the future of transit in this area. This kind of document really gives some heft to what South Burlington can say in those meetings.
Oh, and I fully support the build it and they will come approach, which is basically what this is. I just like to add an extra step to get the employers, you know, because they, you know, in Montpelier, I went to a presentation 10 years ago where National Life and Red Hen Bakery, and there were 3 employers, all who offered incentives to their employees to ride to work, ride or carpool, or they got points. And they were rewarded, you know, for not coming because they had a parking problem. If you've ever gone to National Life, and you've seen the state offices there as well. There's, you know, it's very tight on parking there, and this solved their problem. You know, by offering these incentives, they were able to reduce the amount of parking per business. So there is a real need in some locations in particular where they may have a parking problem that, you know, i.e. the schools.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, let's offer some incentives to get people to, you know, try a little harder to use fewer vehicles.
Yeah, we're hoping that the TDM program that was part of the newest round of LDRs has starts to have some of those effects pretty soon, definitely.
Yeah, TDMs, right.
I guess I have 2 questions. You pointed out these like 3 bullet points here, and like the middle ones, I guess I have 2 comments on it. It seems like if we have a study where it made recommendations for improvements, like wouldn't they just generally be included in this plan? Like, I guess I'm wondering why this Patchen Road one was called out separately, maybe. Like, I know we have other studies that recommend improvements, like the Williston Road and.
Yeah. Erica, I see you nodding. You look
Yeah.
eager to jump on that one.
Yeah, so that was a study that we weren't sure when it was kicking off. So that one in particular did get updated. I have a draft scope of work in my inbox for that project. So again, another UPWP project, but most of the ones that actually pretty much all of the ones that had recommendations that were within a reasonable past. We don't necessarily want to just take a 2010 study and say the recommendations are still relevant, but that having already been scoped gives it more priority, also because we've already invested towards it, so that we don't have plans that sit on the shelf. We even have one design project that we haven't been able to get funding for. So we have final plans kind of just waiting. So we want to make sure that there is more backing saying you've already gotten yourself started on this one. So carry it through.
Perfect. And then I guess my other question about that, and I think you might have answered the question, is like, where is that Patchen Road one? Like, I live right off there, and I know my neighborhood would be interested. Like, are there going to be input sessions, or like, how would we find out about that?
There definitely will be. We're still, we don't have a contract in place yet. But yeah, it will be the whole length of, well, pretty much the whole length of Patchen Road from White Street to the Burlington city line. The section from White to Williston Road is being looked at as part of the larger Garden Street and Williston Road intersections project. So we started from White Street and carried it out to that. But yeah, it'll definitely come across your radar in the, I would say in the 4-ish month range, we'll start having things to bring to people for reaction.
And then I guess my other, what would you like to get from us tonight? Like, I noticed there's no like link to the work that was previously done, so it's hard to comment much on the actual plan because it wasn't really included. So I guess maybe just a sense of like, were you looking for feedback, or was this just kind of giving us an update?
So
on-
primarily this was an update, and definitely want to keep the option open to give any feedback that continue to give any feedback you'd like to add or ask any questions. But that is the primary purpose. You know, the plan itself is, first of all, this sort of the narrative part of it is still being drafted in this final stage, and because the rankings are still in flux given these new variables and edits that we've requested. That's why we didn't want to share them widely, basically, because they just aren't reflective of or aren't going to be reflective of the moment of what the final product is going to be, basically. But you can expect a list of dozens of projects, and as well as the policies and community programs that Erica alluded to, and then the report is a narrative accompaniment to these rankings, basically.
What's the time? When can we expect that report?
So we're planning to present it to the city council on February 3rd. Erica, do you have a sense of whether it's going to be available before that or at that point?
It wouldn't be available too much before that, but maybe a couple of weeks in advance, depending on how fast the internal review and revisions go back and forth. But that is something I can put the project page from the CCRPC in the chat here. Kelsey, if you want to include it in the minutes or send it out for some information there. There's most of the up-to-date information. A few of the draft lists and maps still need to get up there, but that can give you a good picture, or at least a better picture of how we've gotten here. And then the draft will also go up there. I'm gonna say probably mid-January, and then it will, we hope to have it finalized in early March.
And I wanted to just jump in and add that from the planning commission's perspective and the planning perspective, and part of what Nick has been contributing to this project has been a little of that ground truthing where transportation planning and analysis of the network and where are the sidewalks that are missing and things like that is very there's a lot of the snapshot of the moment that's included, and what Nick has been doing, and then what reflects the work of the planning commission is a little of that ground truthing about right now it looks like this, but we just adopted LDR amendments that mean in 10 years, in 15 years, in 30, 40, 50 years, the population centers will be here or here, and it will be more dense here. It'll support, there'll be more people who need to be able to walk to a transit stop or something in these areas. And that's part of what Nick was talking about with his example on Heinsberg Road. The far southern piece of Heinsberg Road, which is close to a third of the distance of Heinsberg Road that's in South Burlington, is through the Eau Claire Farm area that has been permanently conserved. So there will not be, residential development in that area that would further support a 3-mile long bike shared use path all the way down to the Shelburne line. And instead of investing in that, investing in places where like Shelburne Road, like Williston Road, like City Center, and connecting all of those areas where we know people are going to be living and working, that reflects so that the active transportation plan is one step in reflecting what the planning commission has been doing with our LDR amendments, which in turn are reflecting what is in the city plan. So it's all going down the chain, and the ATP is a piece of the puzzle in making sure that the policy set out in the long range plan And then the amendments to the LDRs that regulate where housing is more or less incentivized, or the barriers are removed, depending on how you look at it, is where you're going to be prioritizing further investment, sort of a, people per dollar kind of analysis of, you put in this project and it assists 50 people or assists 5 people. That sort of thing is been kind of the role of the planning department, and it has been Nick's job to kind of make sure that the conclusions of the ATP are reflecting the future South Burlington and not just the data that we currently have about where everything is.
No, you had your hand up first.
Oh,
Donna?
well, yeah, I'm so happy that Erica is the person who's like, one of the main people in charge of this because, she also sees the list of projects that Bike and Ped has had for years, for years. And, projects like Lower Allen Road absolutely has been it's been way at the top of our list for a long time. And it's just a tough one that's finally in design stage, right? Or something like that. And just to make sure that, it's just really nice to see that this one overall plan can now incorporate all of this together. But, a shout out that the Bike and Ped Committee has done a lawful lot of the individual pieces of this already, but it's nice to see it all put together in a comprehensive plan.
So, yeah, huge shout out to the Bike Ped Committee who played a very active role in moving this process through, and in fact, like a statutory role in getting this study
Yeah,
completed.
and Bob Britt
Yeah.
more than anybody to help get the pennies for path going.
Yeah, which is
without which a lot of this wouldn't have happened.
yeah, there wouldn't be an awful lot of point in creating such a plan if we didn't have the money
Right.
from that program to build it out eventually.
Helen?
Yeah, I'm just, I think it sounds as if a lot of this data might be really helpful for a developer, both a commercial developer and a residential developer, to kind of understand what the plan is and how they may impact or even in some ways support it. And I'm just curious if the DRB, if there's a box that they check or in a plan that comes before them that even kind of recognizes that there's this other kind of human part that's really important to development and a place, and that's important to our community, that they could think about.
Yeah. So I think there actually may have been some movement on something that may match what you're discussing. Also in the latest round of LDRs that recently passed were some changes to the overall traffic management regulations when new development is proposed and undertaken. And one of the things that was changed was it sounds obscure, and it is obscure, but it is also important. The ranking for the priority ranking for things that developers can do to satisfy various requirements related to traffic studies. So basically, backing up a little bit, what that means is that for particularly large developments, whether that's subdivisions, whether that's mixed use developments, stuff in city center, something like that, that are going to be subject to a traffic study. They generate 75 or more trips in the peak hour. This is already a requirement that they have to do. Instead of right now, or up until recently, what we have required them to do with that information, if that information is that they're going to be generating more trips than we're used to, we've required them to start putting money into or actually building out extra stoplights, wider roads, more protected intersections, that sort of stuff. And that's just in the way the regulations have been written. So we rewrote those to rank interconnectivity between neighboring lots, building out adjacent sections of capital projects that had already been planned for, addressing bike ped projects on the official map, adding to transport like active public transportation, things like bike bus stops and whatnot. These are now ranked much higher. In fact, all of these are ranked higher as ways to satisfy requirements related to generating excess traffic. At the very last of that ranking is improvements or additions to things to car infrastructure as needed. So what we've done effectively there is redirect developer energy in pretty specific ways towards towards active transportation when they are required to go above and beyond the call of duty because of the excessive traffic that they're generating. This is also in line with the TDM program that I alluded to earlier, which imposes requirements on new development to build out active transportation infrastructure on private property, things like bike racks, bike rooms, changing rooms, public transportation stops, and things like that.
Thanks.
I don't know how relevant this is to this conversation, but I was shocked this summer that there wasn't a paving of Swiss Street and Spear Street and Dorset Street then in such rough shape. I mean, how does all of that factor into this or figure into this?
I'm not sure what the schedule is for repaving on that. Erica, do you happen to know off the top of your head?
Yeah, I can speak to that, and also how we're trying to kind of streamline efforts for exactly that reason. So the Dorset Street, the phase 4 from Aspen and San Remo to Kennedy Drive, that last section that goes in front of the high school, was originally planned to be repaved this past summer. We've been doing kind of every other summer, taking a chunk of the main section of Dorset Street. But that one we ended up delaying by 1 year so that we could include better designs around the pedestrian infrastructure. So fixing the 2 very weirdly located crosswalks into one very logical and more protected crosswalk, addressing lighting on the path. So we made the calculation, and council gave us the direction to continue on this path, that waiting 1 year for a more robust project that does more than just improve the condition for vehicles through there was the way to go. And we're looking at other places that we can do that.
What about Swift? I mean, you filled the some of the ruts in Swift, and that was it. I was really surprised that that section from basically Shelburne Road to Spear Street wasn't paved this summer.
So we actually didn't do any full-scale paving this year because
noticed.
of we needed additional money for Dorset Street for next year. But so next year will be a very long paving list. If you want to see, this isn't the final one, but the kind of estimated list on the DPW website, there is a tab for the paving plan. And so right now, next summer is pretty well laid out, but moving forward from there, we're still doing some of our evaluation of the priorities there based on our pavement inspections citywide. So I'm not sure exactly what year Swift Street will be addressed. So I don't have a good answer for that one, but we're starting to build out our future paving plan better so that we can get an idea of our like kind of 5-year paving plan as our goal.
I just think it's incredible that there's ruts on Swift Street, you know.
A lot of that is actually from studded snow tires being left on for a really long time. That's one of the #1 causes for ruts like that.
Yeah.
Do we have Thanks for the audience. Tim,
Tim's gonna say
did you?
Good evening, Tim Barrett, City Council. Just to reiterate and give a little bit more background of the story. So the paving budget for this year was like $1 million, and it was all allocated to Aspen Drive all the way to Kennedy Drive, Dorset Street, right? And it's 4 lanes. In some areas there might be some center turn lanes too, right? The problem was that the work between the city and the school on improving the pedestrian infrastructure right in and around the middle school and the high school involved some wires, and it would make any sense to redo all that work and then have them dig up that pavement again to put in new electrical conduits and sensors and whatever else they needed. So they just deferred to next year, like she said. They did do repairs on Swift and Dorset about 2 weeks ago. If you noticed, on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, they filled in the worst ruts. So this year's 1 million got deferred to next year. The next year's budget of about $1 million. So they'll be spending like 2 or a little bit over 2 million next year to do the Dorset Street and then do the rest of the inventory that was, prioritized for whatever reason. So, and I don't know what the schedule is for, but I agree, Dorset and Swift have some deep ruts on the uphill sections. And, during the pandemic, a lot of people didn't take anything, didn't take their tires. They didn't change their tires. They weren't driving, and they left their snows on all summer long, and that didn't help. So
So I think
does that
Rebecca
help?
has a good message there with the tires. Yeah.
Thank you,
So,
Tim, for
Thank you, Tim.
clarifying that on
Okay.
the finances also.
Yeah, that was really helpful. Right, Brian, did you have your hand up too?
Ryan Doyle or members of the public in terms of what Nick was saying earlier. I have a few comments. Erica, would you be able to send everyone the map from the website that's hard to find that shows the pavement scores and the information about how often those get evaluated? Or maybe explain how they get evaluated before I give the rest of my comment.
Yes, I can do that. Again, Kelsey, I'll put this
I
in the,
I don't know that we're getting way into paving. It's actually
No
a
worries.
topic,
Um,
not warrant. I don't know how much we want to get into paving. Brent, comments?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
tons. So Donna's not too fussy speaking as an architect. The third public meeting that we had on the active transportation plan had 3 city councilors there, Mike, Andrew, and Lori, all of whom expressed disappointment similar to Donna's at the following city council meeting. I think everybody was expecting this to be bigger and achieve more, except for me, because I didn't think in the first place that it was going to get very much accomplished based on what I read. I think honestly, what we have been presented with is something that could have been done in-house if Erica and Nick had been given enough time to work with the bike bed committee. There really isn't anything that complicated in the results that required an engineer. So it's kind of unfortunate that after all of this time talking about it going to generate something for us, that all we have to show for it is a grading matrix that we had to send back to the engineers to redo because it wasn't very good. And a list of subjective recommendations from the engineers, the vast majority of which I have personally given to the city council and staff, including Helen and Tim. So to see the amount of time put into it is kind of disappointing. I think Donna and everyone else really want to see a lot more come from this, and I hope that we will. To go back to Helen's comment about the DRB and how that gets involved, I think that's a great point. As I said at the last council meeting, I think when we talk about bike ped issues or the NRCC, that things they want to get involved with and do and see happen need to be legislated in the city in a much better way. And that does fall to you guys, mostly in the LDRs, but the Planning Commission writes so many of the important rules that things get done by. And without the city council designating those things to you in a really aggressive way and supporting that with staff time or consultants, then we will continue to not necessarily get the results that we want in our planning process. Because I think I'm on the same page with Helen that like I agree that if we think that we need to have a shared use path along a route in the future, that any redevelopment that happens there should be building that, even if the rest of the length doesn't have that there yet, which is pretty standard with sidewalks. We see developments with sidewalks that don't connect to anything in the hope that in the future there will be that. But a 5-foot sidewalk isn't always what we want to see in a place. And hopefully what we get from future iteration of the plan is knowing more of what infrastructure should actually go there, whether it is a bus shelter that actually protects from the weather or a 12-foot wide shared use path, and be able to incorporate that into what's being proposed automatically. When it does get put on the website in the January, you will find these like sort of subjective opinions of the engineers about what policies you guys can adopt. And a lot of them are fantastic. There's a lot on there that you guys would have to be biting into, but we really don't get better results without a lot of labor until that actually happens. And so I hope the council will prioritize that time for you guys to take a crack at it. I know Nick and Erica in particular are very talented and have a good eye for things. I'm not trying to over compliment them with that. I don't really see many consultants contributing above and beyond what our own staff are already capable of, but that's just my public opinion.
I think that's a great opinion of our staff, and I agree. We have very amazing, capable people working for the city, so working for us. Did you get, I mean, that seemed like an update. Okay, and I guess if you don't need anything else from us, we can,
No, the intention was that you haven't seen it in a while.
Yeah.
And the public process, the meat of the public process has been completed for this project. So coming back to the planning commission for this kind of, what are your questions? What is your, high level feedback before, as part of the input when Erica was saying in the sort of internal review is ongoing, before the report is finalized. That was the intention of the timing of this presentation.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. And looking forward to seeing the rest of it and the recommendations that Ryan was alluding to.
And Erica, are you able
schedule-
to stick around for the UPWP agenda item?
Yeah, I have to go
Yes.
grab my computer charger. I'm amazed it actually lasted, but I didn't want to just dip out. But yes, I'll stick around.
Perfect, thank you.
Perfect. And so we're going to move on to item 6, which is the CCRPC UPWP. The United Planning Work
Unified Planning.
Unified
Program,
Planning Work Program.
which I had to look up myself when I was writing the agenda.
I think I just said it wrong, but we have a whole separate memo about this very exciting topic. And we just heard about at least 2 projects from last year's plan, which is great.
Yeah, so the Unified Planning Work Program is something that is run through the CCRPC. There's a few different opportunities through them to get funding for transportation related projects in South Burlington. One pot is for projects of regional importance and regional interest. Those are slightly different because there is no local match to the funding for it. So if it was, something that was related to how South Burlington from Shelburne Road from South Burlington to Shelburne connected, and something like you could have a regional project or a park and ride off of the interstate could be something that's of regional importance. Those are not things that are on this list. The second pot of money is transportation related funding that comes primarily from the federal government. That does require a 20% match from the municipality because these are generally projects that are internal to a municipality. And then the third pot of money is just staff time from the RPC professionals themselves. I don't believe anything on this list are that, but we also just have a sort of standing relationship with the RPC to do that kind of work for us if we need their additional assistance on discrete projects. So this comes up every year. This is something that the Planning Commission reviews. We have had internal meetings, on the staff side from planning and from Public Works and Transportation to see what are the things that we want, and community development actually being involved in this as well. What are the projects that are right for this fiscal year? Because this is a funding source that does come up every year. What are the projects that we're looking to do that fit into the mold of what the RPC and the UPWP are able to fund? There has to be a pretty significant transportation focus to the project. And what are the things that are in the right stage of development to be requested for this year? Because it is a regional program. Each RPC, there are 10 in the state, each one kind of runs their own version of this, and they only have so much money. So if, you know, if South Burlington is doing 3 things this year, it means that Jericho or Colchester or somewhere may not be getting funded for something, where, you know, some years it's vice versa, where we only get funded for 2 things and Milton gets something and Heinsberg gets something, and that kind of math. So this is after the internal discussions. These are the 5 projects that have been identified for South Burlington to request this funding and assistance from the RPC for. This is not necessarily what we will get funded for, but it is what we've identified as the highest level requests for this upcoming fiscal year. So, as we've sort of starting from the bottom, as we've noted, the active transportation plan part 2 is on here, and Erica will be able to talk a little bit more about exactly what that may entail. As you can see, there's a note, this project scope is still under refinement, but this one is really coming out of the understanding that the ATP that is being finalized is sort of the first step of study in this, and there's more work to be done. And then the others, I think, sort of speak for themselves. So instead of me talking at you, I would love to know if you have questions. Logistically, this is something that the city council needs to approve before it's requested from the RPC. And so they need to do that in January, which means that the planning commission needs to advise them on their recommendations at the December 10th meeting. So you have this meeting, and then next meeting is when you would have to actually approve the recommendation to send to city council. Yeah, I think that's the highlights of this.
Okay, does anyone have any questions or thoughts on the list? Donna?
The one I had, well, there's two thoughts I had. The EV charging for existing buildings.
Mhm.
I just really wonder if planners are the right people to do that. You really need engineers, electrical engineers.
This is not necessarily saying that this money is only to pay for planning consultants. This is money that is transportation related, that is administered by the RPC, but you can absolutely use the part of the money to hire other types of professionals.
Okay, because I mean, there's a lot of technical issues around this, and I thought that the earlier things that the Energy Committee did, it kind of, you know, it was kind of a nice basis, but it didn't really get to the highly technical nature of how do you do this. And I mean, I am aware that Treetops went in for a grant to actually put this in at Treetops. I don't know where that stands. I know Ann Pugh was involved in helping apply for it and everything, but I think we're definitely to the point where people need to know, it's like, can this be done and how do you do it? You know, get into the real nuts and bolts of how do you make this happen? What does it cost? And, you know, a place like Treetops is like ideal, you know, some very similar Stonehenge, you know, big developments, both older developments that, you know, could use these facilities. They actually have garages, you know, so that's a big advantage over some of the newer buildings that, you know, may be more difficult because they have interior garages, and there's definitely some fire marshal issues around, you know, how do you incorporate this stuff and everything. But I mean, it's in the energy codes, but nobody's telling you how to do it. And I think it would be a real step forward to get into the nuts and bolts on that one with that. So, you know, I'd love to see it. I think it needs to be probably focused maybe on a project And, or several projects that are, there's some similar ones in South Burlington that could this really move it, help it move forward.
You mean identify some development?
Well, we already know we already know there's a couple that are already pursuing it and maybe help them, because they actually have money to do it.
So,
even.
so
Like
If-
listening to you.
if they were able, they applied for the resources. I don't know if they got it or not. Because there were a number of projects. I know Green Mountain Power involved.
So 2 points just to add to this. One is the city is currently in the process of hiring a climate action manager. That person would have a very significant role in this project. They would actually likely be the project manager on South Burlington then for it. So the strategy for this is something that would fall to that staff person, because the implementation plan has already been written, and how to actually go sort of step by doing it is something that would fall to a different staff person than we currently have on board. We don't have the capacity to do it until that person is hired. And then the second thing is that there are things that are highly valuable, but are not highly valuable for each municipality to be doing themselves. Technical guidance on how to install things, technical guidance on how to retrofit an existing parking structure or things like that. That's going to need to, I think it is much more efficient to come from the state, from the International Building Code, people from, certainly our municipality has the opportunity to contribute to things like that, but for South Burlington to be doing it, like digging into the technical, how do you do it, and then education about how do you do it, and then specific projects, is not, it's not efficient for South Burlington to be doing it, and then Burlington, and then Colchester, and then Essex Junction, and then everybody else. It's something that is a fungible resource that, if it is done once and it's done well, even if it's done at the national level, that sort of technical guidance is something that I think is beyond the efficiency level of the municipality.
I kind of realize.
I just want to understand. So are you saying that this is one of those things that we would do because it's regional significance? Or are you saying
No,
you
so-
don't think we should be doing a technical manual because somebody else should do it?
That's
I
what
guess.
the latter.
So what is this
So
if
what
it's
is
not a
it?
technical, yeah,
What is
because
it?
I actually was
What is
thinking, oh, maybe I was listening to Donna, I was like, oh, maybe it should be a demonstration project, like actually do all the stuff that needs to happen to have them installed in
See if it
a
works,
place,
yeah.
Right.
Well, document it.
or like
Or-
what, so I guess back to like, what do you think this would be?
Yeah, Erica, are you back? I can't tell.
I am here, yeah. Sorry,
Okay,
my
Erica,
camera's
do you
just
have-
off.
No, that's fine. Do you have any additional thoughts to add about, and I can actually share my screen so you can see what is in Paul's memo about this.
I did pull it open.
Okay, if you want to share
Um,
it, that might be even better.
Oh, it's open on my phone, not my computer, so I could have it without looking
Oh.
away. But I missed a little bit of the conversation, but this is moving forward with one of the highest impact items in the transportation sector climate action plan, and then started to be honed a bit with the implementation plan also. Was there a specific
So, yeah, the
question you wanted me
specific
to weigh
question
on?
is like, what is the thing that they would be doing? Like, there was a discussion of, oh, is it a demonstration project where there's an engineer hired to design a system for a particular building, or is it a like what's the deliverable?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Or if Green Mountain Power, because I mean, they probably, I don't know how much expertise they have in this, but they certainly have an incentive. And they were the ones that got the money from the state to implement this. So I think they probably have plans to move forward with this. We just don't know where it is, but it would be great for somebody to document the process, and the decisions along the way so make it easier for the next people to do it.
So I think we're in a part of this where we're open to feedback on what our deliverables could be. So this is really helpful. Some of the things that were envisioned out of the implementation plan, really the key steps is an inventory of what exists, how to develop a standard for where and how owners of multi-unit buildings go about retrofitting their parking area to have chargers, laying out some standards and kind of policies. And I think that connecting them with the funding mechanisms that can be leveraged is going to be a big part of this. This will definitely be a many partnered effort with developers, existing like larger scale landlords, outreach to some of the folks that own smaller properties, GMP, Drive Electric. There are a lot of people who have different sets of knowledge so that we can get to what you're talking about. And I think something like a demonstration project could come out of this pretty quickly. That might be something if we find someone who really wants to go for it. Maybe we partner with them and we can expedite their property. And
Well, we mentioned treetops as being
Yeah.
one that seems like it's as far ahead as anything. But
yeah,
we don't really know the specifics right now.
right.
Well, I think a demonstration project would be a great idea.
Yeah, follow it all the way through.
Yeah. And see if, and then, because that would identify, I think, some of the challenges with finding the partners.
Mhm.
And what works, what incentives or what kind of,
Even funding.
that's
And what
needed,
it costs.
what it
Yeah,
costs.
That's
It's
the
like,
first
you know,
question
so-
everybody has. What's it cost?
Yeah, I think, I mean, that,
Like that'd be really important.
that kind of thing makes a lot of sense to me. What I was, the step that in my mind was too far was sort of writing a technical how-to manual in a electrician sort of sense, not in a how to get the funding, how to identify, you know, how many how many types of how many each type of charger you want on your site. Like guidance documents, I think is one thing, in the sort of logistics realm. Technical, like how to run the panel and what is the capacity you need and all of those sort of electrical things.
Leave
are
that to
just-
the electricians.
That's too far.
They know how to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
another component of this project that's gonna be necessarily involved is just investigating what already would apply in terms of regulations and seeing if there are any pinch points in that and helping and proactively thinking about that for issuing guidance to people who might be, you know, an HOA or a developer or something like that who might be seeking to retrofit a property. So we want to get out ahead of that. And that's gonna have to be done by whoever ends up performing this study, and that's going to be part of that eventually.
I still think it, I understand that and I agree with that, but I also think people are really anxious to make some progress. And I think you need to have those kinds of how-to manuals and you need the cost and have the right expertise to develop, this is how you could do it. This might work. And then the second part is try it. Find a tenant or a landlord or an owner in South Burlington who's interested in stepping up to the plate. Maybe that's a secondary funding process. But to me, that would be the end goal, is not just a great manual and a how-to, and hopefully someone
Right.
will read it and say that, you know, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
I might want to try that, but rather,
I think the actual funding for an improvement to private property would have to be a different funding source than this. But as you just confirming what you alluded to, like you could set up the whole thing all the way up to the, you know, and now you have to pay the guy, like
Yeah.
that would come from a different.
Yeah,
place.
I think that walking through this is how you think about it, this is how you think about what types of chargers, this is how you decide on a funding source, like just to have walked through that process with a specific landowner property so that it would be ready for that next step? Because otherwise it's hard to picture how it would be used.
Yeah.
Like if there's not at least one demonstration.
Yeah. This idea or ideas like it have been floating around for a while since before I started at the city. You know, it's something we've talked about extensively in the Energy Committee, which I staff. And this item, the reason this item is showing up for this fiscal year is because this would likely be a project for our climate director, as Kelsey was explaining. And so we anticipate we want to set this person up, whoever they are, to have success, have all the resources that they need to take this particular project in particular, which is also a council priority for the fiscal year, to as far as we can take it. So definitely noted on the feedback, and that's going to be taken into consideration along with a lot of thinking that has already been done on this, and a lot of outreach that's already happened to HOAs, and a lot of existing relationships and existing sort of pending plans are all going to be informing this study, and I think it's going to make a lot of difference.
So, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I guess I think some of that should just go in the description.
Yep.
And Duncan?
I'm just thinking from a logistical standpoint, I gotta believe that somewhere there's an HOA or an association that's done this already.
Maybe.
I believe there is somewhere. I mean, I would think that information would be out there in some areas.
Do you think that would be part of the tasks to like do the inventory and like come up with example projects
Yep.
that have
I
been
gotta
done?
believe Over
and-
the entirety
Yep.
of our country, there has got to be numerous fund organizations or HOAs that have done this. There's got to be a blueprint
Yep.
or a map of how it gets done.
Yes.
Information has got to be out there, I would think.
Yeah, so that's something, it's honestly just, some of the funding is for time,
Yeah.
it's for the time spent in finding those opportunities, finding those similar places, finding the places that have done it recently, have similar land use codes and other things like we often look to places like Cambridge, Massachusetts, because they're relatively wealthy and they have a good amount of multi-unit development in their area. So they can have things like that, but that sort of review of what is out there is very likely part of this project scope. Not looking to reinvent the wheel,
Is
looking,
there-
going to find
Wheels
go
up, yeah.
find the wheel.
Is there anything else on this one or are there other ones?
Centipede.
Is this on this one? Is
I
this
did.
on this one?
Done with that one.
Okay.
Okay, so
Paul, you wanna?
Yeah, I'd like to see see us take at least a year to focus on 1 and 2, the ADA issues and the issues that are complementary to the ADA issues.
So you support 1 and 2,
Yes,
the intent. Yeah, I would agree.
Okay.
especially access to public buildings.
I guess on anything else on that one?
Can I ask you a favor? You are talking about 5 items that have not been read into the minutes. Can you enumerate those for me? Because when you talk about item 1,
Right.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Sure, Sue. So there are 5 UPWP proposed projects. Number 1 is the Americans with Disabilities Act Transition Plan, transportation. Number 2 is Plan for Addressing Sidewalk / SUP Maintenance. Number 3 is Williston Road / Hotel / Mary Street Intersection Scoping. Number 4 is EV charging in existing multi-unit buildings. So that's what the discussion was about, was that one. Number 5 is Active Transportation Plan Part 2.
Thank you.
Thank you,
problem.
Sue. Okay, Don had 1 too. Was it on either 1 or 2?
No, it's actually kind of related to 5 and maybe even substituting a different one instead of number 5.
Well, let's see. Does anyone else have any more on 1 or 2 specifically? Okay, then let's go to your.
Yeah, well, this was brought up as part of the discussion on the active transportation plan. And that is the significance and priority of Heinsberg Road as being a much more major pedestrian and bike corridor than there's really facilities for. And, you know, that was actually one thing that last year the Bike and Ped Committee very much wanted to get as a UPWP study. I mean, there's definitely problems both north and south of I-89. The problem with the area around I-89 is speed. And crosswalks have been requested by the neighborhoods along there. They're not real dense neighborhoods, I agree. But because the speed of the roadway is currently like 50 miles an hour, we're not even allowed to put in crosswalks there. And it seems as though because of the way the road is designed, the state's reluctant to reduce the speed limit. And it's just this, you know, it's this, you know, thing that keeps trying to catch its tail. You know, where, you know, how do you slow the traffic down to make it safer for people and, you know, and until you can put in crosswalks. And so I thought, you know, perhaps a good UPWP plan would be to propose even though it's a state road, it is a state road, that's a limitation too, but to propose some design changes, perhaps at intersections or perhaps along sections of that road to slow traffic down, to get it down to a 40-mile-an-hour road so that we can start having crosswalks and make it just safer all the way, certainly not to the Eau Claire property, but certainly up to the new roadway that, because there's a bike path that exits now right onto Heinsberg Road from the
Cider Mill
Cider
2.
Mill
What is
2,
the name of the
Cider Mill
road?
2.
Trying to think, but anyway.
Yeah.
It's
Erica?
NATO. Yeah. So
NATO
it,
Drive, that's right.
yeah. And you bring up a really great point, and that's why one of the examples in the active transportation little paragraph did call out Heinsberg Road and Shelburne Road. I was just looking back and that this section in this memo just called out the Shelburne Road.
Right.
But looking at where different things have been looked at, the ATP is elevating Heinsberg Road, saying it needs to be addressed and a shared use path is the best type of facility given the road design. And something that we've talked about internally that could be part of this study is looking at, is it worth doing something along the road, or is it something we should explore kind of how we've approached Spear Street, where it's more connecting the neighborhoods farther away from Heinsberg Road? So being able to kind of suss that out a bit more was definitely a part that we had envisioned as staff was discussing what part 2 could include related to Heinsberg Road.
That's true. We could-
Okay. Well, I mean, it seems
So-
like if it could be included in 5, that would
Mhm.
make a lot of sense.
Yeah, if
30.
it becomes kind of specific to both those roads, you know, that makes a lot of sense. Because those do seem to be the two that really are hazardous.
Yeah, and Shelburne Road has the issue of on the official map and previous plans, kind of parallel routes that serve similar but slightly different functions. And should all 3 really be presented on the official map? Should we go all in on one of those options? So taking a deeper dive on that one as well.
Okay, anything else up here? Paul, and we'll go down the line.
I missed one, but
That's,
another one.
oh, did anyone have anything else on number 5 here? Okay, Paul.
Okay, so number 3 involving Williston Road Hotel, Mary Street intersection scoping. The neighbors on Mary Street, I remember 10 years ago when we were writing form-based code, were adamant on not having their street become a thoroughfare from Williston Road to City Center. And I'm wondering what the current thinking is on this. As I read this, it's, let's see, maybe we could make it into a thoroughfare. And I think the neighbors probably would be as opposed to that now as they were then.
Probably are.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was gonna comment on this too, just to the extent that the kind of next to Mary Street, I don't know if it's part of this, but there certainly is a school safety conversation that's been had about buses and getting cars into the school and out, and there is a road that used to, I mean, it still exists, that connects with Williston Road. And I think, I hope this conversation or review includes that conversation with the school about how you really can address some of their safety concerns, but not also create, a terrible situation on Williston Road. But I think that's part of this. It's not Mary Street, it's like one street over.
Yeah, so a couple things. First of all, we are going to be talking about the larger city center Williston Road area streets with an early proposal at our next planning commission meeting. So, before we get talking about the greater area in too much detail tonight, just know that we do have some time for that in an upcoming agenda.
Okay.
And also to address concerns I heard from both of you, the purpose of having a scoping study to look at specifically how and where that intersection should be designed is to address, among other things, is to balance local concerns with sort of the regional transportation needs. That's one of the primary purposes of such a study. But I'm going to leave it to Erica and her traffic engineer expertise to talk about the actual details of like what the bulk of that study would be about.
So this is very much based out of a 2017 study of Williston Road that envisioned kind of a future grid network, which is what Nick is talking about with the future item. But it's always envisioned a signal, at least one signal between the Williston and Dorset and Williston and Midas and White Street, which is being reconfigured in the coming years. And so we've been looking at that, and that plan called out 2 signals. Having looked at it, we really think it would be appropriate for just one. So then we need to decide exactly where that would be. Is it something that Mary Street and Williston Road become signalized? Does the current location of the signal at the hotel, actually both hotels, Windjammer, Starbucks, Moe's, if the signal stays in place there, but we address how traffic in and out of Mary Street would operate. And then, of course, as you talked about, at least one of them, there are a lot of driveways through there. So introducing a bigger intersection, how does that interface with all of those other potential access management issues? And just to speak to Mary Street opening, it is still going to be, we'll move the Jersey barriers in coordination with the one of the ends of Garden Street being open. I believe it's Garden Street South being opened.
Is it with South? I remembered it being with North, but you remember better than me?
It is tied to one of the phases of Garden Street
Right.
that is in design. So that decision has been made that those will take the Jersey barriers down.
So it will become a.
thoroughfare?
It will be a through street.
Road.
It will be a through street between Market Street and
Take a right.
Williston Road.
I was just gonna say, building on what both you guys said, I would strongly advocate as much work as we can do on number 3, because I work right there. I see the traffic flow through behind the DMV, through the hotel lot. It's kind of an unfinished piece there.
Yes,
Yeah.
very much so.
And there's a lot of traffic going through that in an area that really isn't designed for it
Yeah.
right
it's-
now. I mean, you're
parking
talking about parking lot and a back alley.
Right.
It's pretty much being used as a major thoroughfare.
Sure.
Yeah.
There's no real speed limit.
No, there
it's,
is, believe me,
yeah.
it's Wild West back there sometimes, but,
Yeah.
I really think and I think the people in Mary Street, certainly they need to be consulted, but I think that piece needs to be take care of
Yeah.
on some front.
Anything else on these up here? Tim and then Ryan?
I just want to make one comment that Paul Connor met with the neighbors on Mary Street and also at Allard Square, and there was a detailed plan about putting a sidewalk on Mary Street before they opened anything up. So I didn't know if you're aware of that, and I don't know what the status of that construction is, but I think that was
Next summer. It'll be
Bef-
constructed
Next
next summer.
summer?
that was before the pandemic hit. I think they had that meeting. Maybe it was 2020, early 2021. Anyway, thanks.
Ryan Doyle, two comments. I thought I saw some kind of a draft that said Heinsberg Road, Old Farm, Tilly, and John Fay kerfluffle section might be up for some kind of scoping
Some kind of what?
study.
Oh, scoping. I thought you said sloping and I didn't know what you were talking about. Scoping, yeah.
The slopes are already pretty bad there for pedestrians, but so that's directly north of the Heinsberg Road Bridge 116 crossing the interstate. There's a light there currently. It's pretty much like you just really can't go south of there safely. And with all the development up Old Farm Road, I thought there was a concern about how that would all be configured. I don't know if that was on people's radar or if that had been on a list and removed. So that's the first comment or question. And the other one is about number 3 with the possible intersection on Williston Road, Mary Street vicinity. It's, going all the way back to the TIF plan and the decision to make this area city center and to have a TIF district said that that neighborhood would change. Fundamentally, that's what was honestly agreed to when whoever came before you decided that this would be city center and this would be a TIF district. You guys hired consultants, you laid out the possibility of a grid network and wanted interconnected streets where people could walk between places and could also access Williston Road, or Strode, if you like that terminology. So if no such scoping is done, if no improvements to the light occur, there can be no safe passage through of pedestrians or cyclists to the north side, or even really along that whole vicinity. There will continue to be really dangerous cutting through of parking lots. There will continue to be dangerous left turns at times when there shouldn't be. And it would sort of be abdicating responsibility for the past decisions that the Planning Commission and City Council have made, as well as just abdicating responsibility for safety of this area. So I would really encourage these types of intersections that intersect with state roads that we have limited control over, to really think about how you can use resources from CCRPC to help make those places safer and work locally for the city as a whole, and also with the understanding of how intertown these connection points are.
Yeah, thank you. Well, so far I'm hearing general support for all of this with some, nuances. I know in the past we've been able to recommend kind of a whole group of them. Are you feeling like it's okay for us to pass all of these on? Or are you hoping for us to whittle them down?
No, I think it's absolutely fine to pass them all on. This has already been whittled down from a much larger list that staff had been working on. So they're all ripe to go. What we can get funded from the RPC and get their support on would be helpful. And I don't think that necessarily needs to be whittled down any further. We will do some clarifying in the sort of description of the scope of these 5 things. You'll have that at your next Planning Commission meeting. At that point, you may want to identify the sort of highest priority, just so that we are aware of that when discussions are had with the RPC about what may or may not be funded, because we do work closely with them. But that can be had at the next meeting.
Great. Okay, then let's move on to the commercial uses. Big changes.
Yeah. So, in your packet, you have both a verbal description, or a narrative description of what I have sort of scoped out. And now I'm trying to, why it's not letting me back into my meeting, I'm not sure.
Probably because we were scheduled to end right now.
Let's
Actually,
see.
no.
No,
we're
not
still-
quite. You still
Yeah.
have a little time.
All kinds of time.
Yeah.
It said
It's a-
other
which
business at
case-
8:45.
Why
I kind of
am
let time slip here.
Oh, here we go. I'm back in business.
We could start with that exciting flow chart.
Exciting flow chart. Well, I see I have one background item to the exciting flow chart. This,
You didn't get that.
no, you didn't get this.
No.
This is just, woo. So you have a little context on what we're dealing with here. So this is the use table. It's the list of uses, not where they're allowed. That this is the current as of adopted, a few weeks ago version. Residential uses is in that blue box to the top left. That has been expanded a bit because we went to building types as uses up there. The sort of aqua turquoise color is what has been the public and quasi-public uses. So generally they are either truly public or they are public benefit, like direct public benefit kinds of uses. Those two boxes I have not touched. So your fun sort of flowchart scatter plot is not those uses. Some of that may get still moved around, things like congregate care, assisted living, continuum of care facility versus group home, residential care home. There's some other things that can be consolidated on that side, but that's just not what we've been working on up to this meeting. The point of this is to show you that you have a total of 83 uses in South Burlington, 60 of which are purely commercial. So this is the sort of chart that I put together to demonstrate how we're thinking about this. To the left is, generally speaking, the less impact on business on properties around a use and the community at large. Farther to the right, which I will make this small so you can see better, is well, that didn't work because it's on the other computer, but all the way, the only thing you're missing is the blue box is airport uses. So it's sort of from the least impactful in a general sense. So it's not necessarily from scale left to right in size. It's not left to right in noise. It's not left to right in trucking. It's not left to right in vehicle focused or parking needs or outdoor storage. But this is my sort of scatter plot brain map of the general amount of impact when you add all of those different things together. That's why it's not a linear thing. It's more of a blob. And then the intention, as you can see on the bottom, is that the farther left you move in this plot, the more allowable something becomes as a mixed use, as a more residential use, and also I should have noted as mixed with other commercial uses as well. So things will have less impact on other commercial uses that may be around them, the farther that you go to the left. Dark blue is kind of the standalone things that don't have a scale component to them. Some of them are a little defined by scale, like limited neighborhood commercial is what you adopted in your last round of amendments, is that, very small neighborhood serving retail and services kinds of businesses. But then the green, the purple, and the lighter blue all have scales to them. So the idea being that some of those things are really, the change in impact is not necessarily with what they are, but the size that they are. So something like consumer facing commercial, a, 2,000 square foot space of retail, services, restaurant, things like that, would all have a similar impact on other uses and people and the community around it, if it is all that sort of small scale size. Instead of it saying retail, and then anything from a 2,000 square foot store to a 20,000 square foot store would be allowed because they're both retail. So that's the general framework that I was working from. The few things that stand alone on their own are both sort of positive and negative. Off hours, consumer facing commercial, and I recognize these are very wonky titles and I'm trying to figure out a better way, but they felt descriptive enough to be working on.
OCFC.
Yeah, exactly. So off hours, consumer facing commercial is a recognition that something that is a restaurant, like primarily food serving restaurant that also hosts open mic nights, but also serves a good amount of alcohol after 10 p.m. or whatever it is going to be different from a brunch restaurant that's only open from, 8 to 2 or something like that. But also that bar restaurant that has music potentially may be more similar to a true music venue or a comedy club or a theater or something than it is to other bars and restaurants that are maybe closed before 9 p.m. So the idea is that, yes, all of these things, then there will be things in the different categories, specific instances that will have different kinds of impacts. Like there's always going to be variability within these categories. But the attempt here is to capture what is the biggest impact of a type of use and how can you cluster things into uses that make businesses going in and out of a space more flexible and more fungible over time. So for example, something like commercial with outdoor activity, that would include things like the current commercial greenhouse use, but also potentially contractor's yard, because there's outdoor storage of materials, there's outdoor vehicles, there's forklifts and things like, so is it really functional? Like, yes, Gardner Supply is not the same as Curtis Lumber, but are the impacts similar enough that they can be sort of regulated in the same way and allowed in the same districts across the city? So the only one that you have that is on this slide that is not on your thing is accommodations. That is a question mark. Is that something that fits into one of these other bubbles well or not? Is it something that can be collected into one bubble? We currently have extended stay and regular hotel as different things, even though many times functionally they look very similar from the outside and have similar amounts of traffic and other impacts. So that's one that I threw in there. Oh, and the last one that I thought does require some additional explanation is transit required uses. That is actually something that is more on the positive side. So something that is a commercial activity, but is a sort of basic needs commercial activity, things like a medical office. It's sort of the proxy for the transit overlay district, things that we want to have in areas that are more tightly served by transit and not necessarily out in, the Southeast Quadrant or somewhere where you can't get there by bus. So I'd love any thoughts if you read through the memo and looked at this thing, if there were anything that jumped out at you as like, that makes no sense to me, or that should be, combined, or that shouldn't be combined. This is oversimplifying. Yeah.
I do have a question in semantics.
You gotta turn on your mic just for recording.
I had a question, consumer facing, I get.
Yeah.
General, just give me a real life example. What is the difference?
For which one? Sorry, for general commercial?
Facing in general, yeah.
So general commercial, I think, is things like actually light manufacturing, like a small clothing manufacturer that has 4 employees and is making hats or something. That is a commercial activity, but you're not having commercial traffic and people coming to the place. So it's a lot of things that are like that.
Other than employees. I mean,
Correct.
You don't have the retail component.
You don't have the sort of
coming and
Yeah.
going.
You don't have a lot of coming and going. You don't have the, everyday people are coming here. And the idea is that something like that can be placed somewhere that's not necessarily in the middle of city center, where we're trying to have more of a, human focused pedestrian scale environment. Something like a small scale brewery, or the brewing facilities for a brewery that has a brew house somewhere else. Like, I just think in Heinsberg, you have, is it Foam? I think Foam has their brewing facility in Frost is out there too as well.
It's fast, yeah.
Frost is there, but Foam Brewing, that's on the waterfront here, does their brewing out there. So like that would be a general commercial, that might be medium scale, but something that is producing goods, has employees generally, but is not drawing customers to their location.
Where would general office fit in? Because that can be very small,
Yeah, that would be general commercial.
general commercial.
Yep.
And well, the adaptive reuse, I mean, I know you
Yeah.
got some notes in there
Yeah.
because, I mean, because I've worked on some adaptive reuse projects, so, often it's schools, old schools
Yep.
make fantastic houses or residences, apartments and stuff like that. Now they're starting to look at, can some old office spaces be made into
Yep.
residential? The location dictates,
Yeah. So the
the
adaptive,
use to a certain degree, how many people are willing to live in a fairly commercial zone or previously institutional zone.
yeah. So the adaptive reuse is a difficult one for me. For a long time, I didn't have it in this chart at all, that it would just be a sort of separate regulation that like, if you're reusing a building and you're keeping X% of the existing structure and you're only adding, up to 10% of additional structure, whatever it is, like some parameters on it, that then you could put a new use into a building that would otherwise, maybe the building doesn't meet setbacks or it doesn't meet, other stormwater requirements or something else, that it's like being able to use buildings that we already have.
Need some additional flexibility.
Correct.
Just make it easier for people to do it, by
Right.
allowing more flexibility there.
Right. So one version of this, I had it pulled out and just had another, the idea would be to write a different section of the LDRs that says like, if you're, adapting an existing structure with the parameters that I said, then, you don't need to meet some of these other requirements if the building is already non-conforming with those things, but it adds the flexibility to change the use, where often it's much more difficult to change the use if the building isn't conforming. There's some issues with conforming uses, conforming structures, etc. So I did throw it in here kind of at the last minute, thinking that it is a use, but it's kind of a weird broad use. So that's something I definitely still need to.
I almost feel like you need 2 of them.
Okay.
But you could have an adaptive reuse that's more commercial and quite large.
Yep.
Mhm.
And then another adaptive reuse that really is more residential.
Right.
Or less intrusive. So, I mean, either you put it right in the middle
Mhm.
or you just identify that there are
Scales.
scales in that you've already included in this with small, medium, and large.
Yeah. So the idea, and heard Helen, that makes a lot of sense to me. The idea is that you may have an adaptive reuse of something like a school, as Donna has an example, that maybe it's in an area that wouldn't otherwise, like the LSN doesn't allow like a 30-unit, multi-unit building. But if you're adapting an existing school into a multi-unit building, you might be allowed to do it, even though that if I'm go back to the previous, it's not on
Right.
it's a different use in the residential side.
It does make me wonder though, if it does need, I don't know, it feels like maybe a more discussion, because it might need what you're talking about, like.
Just a different regulation.
Yeah.
Yep.
Or, I mean, maybe the criteria could be clear enough to, like what Helen said, you could have like a small and a big or something, but
Yeah,
it feels
definitely.
I
like,
definitely think that.
feels like, how do you figure out when it's okay to have the 30 unit
Yeah.
existing building?
Because the
when-
thought process is that the scale of the building is not something new to the area. That if you're changing a building that's already there, it's not a new imposition on whatever part of the community you're going into. So it's sort of a perceived lower impact because it's not a brand new thing.
But I think
Sure.
it
Yes.
could have some of these other, I mean, you listed off many different types of impact.
Yeah.
Like traffic and parking, and
Yep.
it feels like the size of the physical building isn't the only thing.
Correct.
So maybe.
Yep.
Right.
Some more criteria on that.
Well, then,
Yeah, that makes sense to
probably
me.
the one that we really have in South Burlington that's potentially an issue is the mall. You know.
To
because
be
we don't
completely
have-
clear, this is not form-based code. This is not in the form-based code.
Oh, okay.
The form-based code uses are, here's a list of I think there might be 20 things on the list that in various transect zones are prohibited, otherwise everything else is allowed. So the form-based code is written the opposite way. So these categories wouldn't necessarily apply at the U-Mall.
We did talk about, like, the first time this idea came up that I remember was in the old Hanfords that's now become Tesla, the
Yeah.
idea of, oh, there's this big building. It'd be really great to continue to use this big building, but maybe there's limited uses that fit perfectly within our existing zoning, and like the idea of like, could there be like flexibility in our code to be able to reuse something that's already existing, because it's just such a great thing. and
Yes.
not have to tear it down.
Yeah, so in that example, the way that it was gone about is that we had to change the zoning to allow auto sales
Right.
in that zoning district. If adaptive reuse was written in a certain way, you could have a certain scale of uses or certain of these other uses that are allowed only as adaptive reuse. Like you can't build a new building for an auto dealership, but if there's an existing building that you can fit your auto dealership into, maybe it's fine, without having to further allow more buildings to be built to that purpose.
I think the accommodations needs some more specifics as well.
yeah.
I mean, you can have a bed and breakfast.
Yep.
It could be kind of large. You could have 6 units or 6 bedrooms. And then you can also have the Sheraton.
Yep.
So there's, and they each have very different impacts, I think, on the neighborhood.
Right, so this
I
is,
think it should be on there, 'cause that's a big piece of, or,
well, for a while, I wasn't sure, so where I was sort of monkeying around with this is accommodation different enough from restaurant and retail in the amount of traffic, and it's drawing people who are from out of town, et cetera, to not fall into that fuchsia category, the sort of consumer facing commercial, small, medium, large. So that's where you differentiate between the bed and breakfast that has 6 bedrooms would be a small, where it's now the DoubleTree, but the Sheraton would be the large.
yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was.
So you think
feeling.
accommodations could go into, well, then perhaps the title
Mhm,
needs more clarity.
definitely.
Because I guess I didn't really think of consumer facing commercial as a hotel,
Yep.
Although it is.
Yep.
although I guess it is.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess, yeah, it's hard to like step back
I
and
guess that's a
say,
restaurant too.
what does it
Right.
mean?
Or two.
You need a bunch of parking, you're gonna have people and cars in and out all day, like you're gonna have people going in and out of maybe a front door, like.
Yep.
But-
Yeah, go
But
ahead.
to your point, the scale would be similar to, you know, a Costco or something. Well, not Costco, that's a bad example, but
But-
you know, a large
Yeah.
grocery store. I mean,
Yeah.
you've got
So consumer facing commercial large would include something like a large grocery store or a wholesale club or, you know, things of that, Home Depot, things of that scale. Hotel could be that big. You could even include something that is, you know, indoor play facility like Monkey Do in Williston or the trampoline park is drawing people to like indoor commercial recreation can fall to that category as well.
Well, then maybe you should eliminate the orchid and just have accommodations included
In the definitions.
in the purple.
Yeah, it's interesting how accommodations and general commercial sometimes come pretty close together. You know, I just had my computer repaired and, you know, used to have space in one of those little shopping malls,
Mhm.
shopping centers along Shelburne Road. Well, that space is getting eaten up by higher paying tenants. So he ended up in the Smart Suites. You know, and I'm thinking, he's like, well, temporary, but you know, that's a hotel space, essentially. It's long,
Smarts.
it's a long-term, it's like, I guess, I don't know. Business people rent those spaces when they have to stay here
It's
for
on
a while.
Dorset Street? I don't even know where that is.
Yeah, it's on
Huh.
Shelburne Road.
oh,
No, I think
I'm
that's
thinking
a
of the other
common,
one.
Yeah, the suites,
Then-
suites are very interesting because they tend to have some business uses as
Oh.
well as,
Yeah, I guess so.
you know, it's kind of an interesting combination of business and accommodation. But
Sure.
but they do seem to mix pretty well. And when you go to, you know, conferences and, you know, these companies that don't want to rent the expensive space on the floor, they just rent some suites in the hotel and that's their commercial space. So it's
Yeah.
interesting how
Well, I guess I just
how
think about,
flexibility sort of happens on its own.
like, Hotel Coolidge in White River.
Mhm.
Like you have, it's very much like our T5, like the idea where you have businesses on the ground floor, but then kind of that grand entrance to the hotel lobby, but then right up the first stairs, there's a few like kind of officey kind of
Mhm.
on that first floor, where right up the first steps, but then I think the rest of
Mhm.
it's actually like more traditional hotel, but
Yep.
it's like an interesting kind of
I just stayed there.
mix. I
Yeah,
just went
and-
to a
Yeah, it's
meeting
all-
there.
And the intention would be that these things you could, so you would be allowing multiple of these in the same district. So you could have a property that has the consumer facing first floor and then maybe the general commercial second floor, but you don't care if the general commercial is an accountant who is sitting in her office doing her accounting thing and doesn't really get people there, or if it's a, I don't know. Like the idea is that if you have fewer uses that are more encompassing and more focused on the impacts, then things can come and go more easily without site plan review.
Yeah.
If it's approved to be consumer facing commercial small and it's a small retailer, or if it's a hair salon, or if it's a
Little
deli.
Plaza is another one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
You know, because the hairdresser, I'm thinking there's a hairdresser in the first
And
floor
usually
there.
Lily's.
and-
Yep.
Yeah.
Priscilla's in a restaurant.
You know, Duncan's been trying to say
No,
something.
you mentioned it, and I think that looking at each one of these little blocks and thinking of putting things together by their impact, not necessarily their use,
Right.
you know, and trying to
Yep.
simplify. Yeah, I think you guys are heading in the right direction. Yes.
Yep,
Yeah.
definitely.
I think that seems to make sense.
Great. Yeah, it's gonna be a tricky thing to write definitions for some of these things because it's, you know, you don't have the opportunity when you write definitions for a use to have this kind of back and forth. Well, what if it's a this and what if it's a that? So being able to do this well, I think is going to be it's gonna be tricky, but I'm glad to hear that you're feeling reasonably good about collecting uses in this way. And we will have some stragglers, you know, there won't be just these uses, like something like waste transfer station, like doesn't fit well into some of these other things because of the nature of it's outdoor activity, but it's also you get a good amount of people and you have like there's a few things that will end up needing to stand alone in the end. But a good number of the 60 uses that I showed you on the previous slide would be able to fit into this. And just as a super quick example, vehicle focused commercial large could potentially encompass the dark blue would be everything that's in those categories would be part of that definition. And then the light blue would probably be maybe some of it, or you'd have to write the definition in a certain way to collect it and not collect it. Cause it feels strange to have auto and motorcycle sales, RV and boat sales, you know, agriculture, construction equipment sales as being completely separated things when the, you know, impact of the site, the scale of the site, things like that, is very similar. So we have a lot of these, again, see that's sort of the repair and can be in a much smaller place, but you might have a facility that has, you know, incorporates both. We have a weird number of trucking and processing and distribution and warehousing related uses that even in our own development review staff and planning staff, being able to parse out, well, this one's warehousing and distribution, but this one's processing and storage, like they don't, it's sort of a messy pile of things that we need to correct. So those are just a couple of examples that I wanted to throw out there.
So you're putting them all together under,
Yeah. And those are sort of working slides and working definitions. So I didn't want to get too far into it, but just as examples of the types of things that could be aggregated.
Yeah, I think the other one we didn't mention was like the senior living, congregate care kind of things, and that those are.
You had those in.
Yeah,
So I
that
said
was mentioned there, and I'm like, I wouldn't slide that too far to the right.
correct. Yeah. So those are listed as actually, I'll just show you.
Those
here. These are in the two blue boxes. Group home and residential care home is currently in a residential use, but congregate care, assisted living, continuum of care, and then also skilled nursing facility are separated uses in the public, quasi-public. Those are and group quarters, you know, those are things that have some overlapping definitions. And understanding that that might be a thing that has scale as well. We may be able to consolidate that kind of continuum of care facility, senior living, assisted living, memory care, however you want to describe all of those things, and do that by scale, because there are facilities that have 10 residents that fit really well in a, you know, large Victorian in a neighborhood or a new building, but into a neighborhood because it's the same scale as a fourplex.
Yeah, there's a really good example of that in Virgins right now.
Yeah.
The Grand.
Yep.
That, you know, it's kind of it's a residential use, but it's also right on the main square. So it's actually the perfect location.
Yeah, well, we actually have a reasonably good example off of Williston Road. There's a senior living facility on the north side of Williston Road that blends in completely with the neighborhood. Yeah.
A gazebo.
Yes, maybe. I don't remember. I'm blanking what it's called.
It's very
But-
close.
But it blends in with the neighborhood, and the intention being that people potentially from the neighborhood can still remain connected to their neighborhood, or new residents to the neighborhood are still connected to that community. That's a different scale than, what's the one on Shelburne Road? The big one.
Or the Pines on
Yes.
Dorset Street.
Yeah, there's some that are much more sort of,
for the Pines on
Or
Dorset
the
Street.
Pines on Dorset Street.
right, so there's some that are a more institutional level scale and don't blend into residential neighborhoods as well. So that's something that I haven't tackled yet, but I just wanted to acknowledge
Yeah,
what you'd
that's
said.
another-
Well, and then also, I mean, there's private ones. I don't know to what degree this exists in South Burlington. But like small, like you wouldn't want to say, you know, you couldn't have like 4 people living together, because I know some of the codes have restricted this before, that you couldn't have 4 unrelated people living in a residence.
Well, that's
You know,
that's a
that's
whole different can
that's
of
a whole different
worms.
thing.
That's an anti-brothel rule. That is a whole
I know,
nother.
but it kind of
It's a
now it's
personal
like,
bug
well, wait a
rule.
minute, you better
Now more than ever.
we better start thinking about this, because it's sort of a practicality of living in expensive houses.
So yeah,
I don't think
came from,
anyone's
huh?
suggesting adding brothels.
No.
That's not.
That's where that came from, though.
yes,
Oh,
it is. I could go, I
had to do
could,
with student housing or something.
Oh, it was that Burlington used it for that purpose.
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
core of it is a, anyway,
Burlington's came into existence more recently, like in the
Yeah.
2000s, specific to
Right.
like reduce students,
students,
big
yeah,
student groups.
student groups in
So
housing,
many different, huge homes. We don't have an old community.
correct,
We don't have old Victorian.
that have 12 bedrooms or
that have
something.
12 bedrooms that you could
Correct.
turn into 6 apartments.
We also don't have
a
nice
very
old factories,
different
nice old brick
feeling here.
factories.
Yeah,
It's more like, do we want what is was a office building? Can we imagine that as housing? And it might be ugly housing potentially, but it could be.
doesn't have to be.
It doesn't
But-
necessarily have to be, but it's not a lovely old Victorian.
Mhm.
It's a square brick thing.
Yeah, speaking actually of the Vermont Development Conference, one of the things that was just raised, I think by the keynote speaker was conversions of office buildings into non-traditional living arrangements, not like into apartments, because of adding that many kitchens, that much plumbing, all that into like the, 2-bed, 1-bath
Oh.
apartments can add a ton of infrastructure. But, right, so, but instead having more, sort of shared kitchen and bathroom in the core, which it's, these buildings are a certain bulk that doesn't have a ton of light going all the way in, but having the living spaces and the bedroom spaces around the perimeter is just something that has been floated in other places. So there's a lot of opportunity.
Like-
What's
like
that?
dorm-like. I mean, I think
Dorm-like,
a lot
yeah.
of people have experienced
Mhm.
that.
Yep, absolutely.
successfully.
Absolutely. Yep. So there's a lot of bits, but residential, purely residential is specifically something not in what I've been noodling.
Well,
Oh,
Kelsey, what would be helpful for tonight? Anything else? Or, I mean, we've given some general feedback.
No, the general feedback has been really helpful. The general thumbs up to keep going down this path is very helpful. Was there anything that I said or anything in the memo that is particularly that jumped out to anyone as being, oh, no, we don't, that's not, that particular detail is something that doesn't work or I don't like.
Well, I guess one thing that jumped out at me is, I think of like successful old neighborhoods, and they often have like I don't know, like a bar.
Yeah.
And like,
Absolutely.
if the bar all winds up over in off hours, consumer facing commercial, and you
Right.
can't have a little,
That
whatever.
isn't limited neighborhood commercial.
Would that
No.
be like?
No, but
how-
you could limit the hours though, that would put one into another category.
Oh, okay.
And we
Maybe
currently,
that'd be-
so the current definition of limited neighborhood commercial, which is based on limited scale and hours and lighting and parking
Like a
of-
deli.
of a list of 4, I think it's 4 other uses. So it's personal service or personal instruction facility, retail, restaurant, short order, restaurant, regular. You could absolutely put, bar in there, or you could define it in a way that allows for consumer facing commercial small could be something that serves alcohol and is open till 10 PM. But maybe it's not the one that's open till 2 AM. Those are things that you could, like, those are all tweaked things in how these uses are defined. Off hours consumer facing commercial doesn't have to mean you close at 7. If you close after 7, you're in that category. It could mean 9, it could mean 11, it could mean 2 AM. That it's only things open past those hours that fall into that category. So those are all sliders that can be moved.
Yeah, because I guess I'm just thinking of like Burlington, there's like the Old North End and there's
Yep.
Tea Rugs and there's, like a few of these like
Yep.
beloved community.
Yep.
Yeah. I'm not saying we all have to go out drinking, but like, it's just like a gathering space.
Yep.
that I don't know if only it works in commercial.
You could also, the thing that just came to mind is off hours consumer facing commercial comma, medium. Like if it's small, I don't care how late it's open. But if it's of bigger than a certain size, then it's the
Mm.
combination of scale plus hours
Maybe there's
is
a
when
thing
you get
like
into that other category. Like you can, like higher ground, like nectars, things that are open later and are a little bigger. That could be defined by that combination of things. You have to be a certain scale and open past a certain time to fall into that, because
Yeah, like Radio Bean feels
Yeah.
very different than Higher Ground.
yes. Yes. Yep, that's absolutely something that can be.
I don't go out enough. I don't know any of these.
I had to look it up on the map, actually. It's been like
But
so
that's
long
okay.
since I've been down.
I know. I had to look up Radio Bean.
I moved out of the North End so long ago. I had to open up the map to be like, wait, what was that?
It's
Yeah.
all right. It's all right. I'm okay.
It's okay. Centered over here.
Stating the obvious. Yeah.
Okay.
But like here, it feels like a lot of people wind up going to like some of the hotel bars even.
Yeah.
Like it's actually interesting. It's like an interesting culture that like local.
Yep.
So I don't know. It just feels like maybe it's something that we don't have a lot of in our community.
No, we haven't allowed it.
Well, and the
But
intention
yeah,
too is
maybe
if,
that's
for
even-
example, if you had,
Grocery used to be that.
I think it might
I
still
think
be.
it still has some of it, yeah. Something like consumer facing commercial large. Could be the large, if accommodations was folded into that, consumer facing commercial, then large could mean the top 5 floors is hotel and the first floor is restaurant or bar or whatever, and that's all one big thing. That's all one use. So I don't, if for some reason it turned out that the bar restaurant was wildly successful and the hotel was less so, and the bar wanted to go up and take over the second floor, okay, it's still the same use. So that's the sort of thought process, is that kind of flexibility in a space.
It sounds great.
Ryan, you have something to add?
Ryan speaking, Ryan Doyle. This is an awesome exercise, Kelsey. I love it. I think it's great to parse these out and to draw attention to what the actual nuisances are rather than just the assumed traditional Euclidean zoning that we've been using. As somebody who lives in the neighborhood near accommodations, Green Mountain Suites and the Pines are really terrible neighbors for a neighborhood. The Pines has lots of emergency vehicles showing up with their lights flashing a lot, because the fire department shows up when somebody falls and can't get themselves up, and other reasons too, right? So, staff at a place like that or Green Mountain Suites, they are out on the sidewalk smoking a lot. So when me and my students are walking home from school, we're passing a lot of smoke. It's not necessarily the worst thing in the world, but it's kind of a nuisance especially to be in a neighborhood where you're expecting to be able to have kids play outside, to then have just random people outside smoking who aren't from your community, and to have so much surface parking, and to then have people driving through your neighborhood who don't have any connection to it or any investment in keeping it safe. So I think when we look at some of these types of uses, it's good to parse out why and how and why they interact with the neighborhood. Something like that could be ameliorated with certain different modal filters. So like ways that you filter different types of traffic. So it'd be like bump outs, very tight turning radii, things like that might just keep unfamiliar traffic from spreading into the neighborhood further and just sticking to leaving out on Dorset Street. So some of those things can be ameliorated, others cannot. So when we look at like commercial with trucking services and that other slide that Erica presented, like that's just so good, because what has such a big impact on a neighborhood or people's quality of life is the danger and nuisance of large vehicles. So being able to look at your road network and restrict uses that would require large 18-wheelers to just those most main routes means that you can tighten curb radii when you go through and fix a road that is closer to neighborhoods or where kids might be crossing to go to school. It allows you to make those changes without having to then say, oh, we can't do that here. And so thinking about that size of truck and how there's different sizes of truck and how that pairs down, along with, I like the Gardner Supply example. I think they have a Kubota, maybe two, not all that loud, but a place that's doing towing is going to be lifting cars up and down off of another truck. That will make more noise. Or a lumber yard with picking up lumber and using larger vehicles than a Kubota. That will make more noise. Even lots that back onto the highway, for example, highways are terribly noisy. And so it might be a small neighborhood like mine where I can, still hear the highway so many houses away. But if you want to really think about how you get those most nuisance places to concentrate where there's already nuisance and have the least spread or creep going further, then the amount of surface parking also matters. If they require specialized HVAC, that might be louder. If they are outside, they might not have a whole lot of large equipment, but what kind of equipment will they be operating on their premise, even if that equipment doesn't leave their premise? Those are those kinds of things that will bother the people living behind them, for example, or especially in terms of surface parking. In St. Albans, where I come from, my ward had a small facility with 12 elderly folks who were just being taken care of in this old Victorian home, private business. There was an inn with 7 rooms, and there was an old schoolhouse that was converted into apartments, right? And these didn't have a negative impact because the amount of traffic they generated was so small. You could fit that amount of parking actually on the lot themselves. But once you start putting large surface parking in, you're inviting so many more people. So, I mean, like the Radio Bean is fairly close to downtown, for really honest, but it's so easy for people in that neighborhood to walk down to it where it collects closer to Pearl Street. And you guys did look at some of those definitions that Kelsey brought to you before, where it's not just anywhere in the neighborhood, but at certain nodes or the busier parts of the neighborhood. And I thought that was a really good exercise too. And when you start pairing these up with the kinds of nuisances, then yes, that corner where you meet a slightly larger road might be okay for a bar that's open till 10 p.m. Getting there without spot zoning and getting those definitions polished, that might be a really big haul. But as much as you guys can be aware of the subtlety of the nuances, the subtlety of the nuisances, then that will just help Kelsey so much more. And I think will result in a much better product in the end.
Thanks, Ryan. I think that idea of the only at nodes, we've talked about nodes for a long time. Maybe it is something where some of these could be closer to fully residential if they're more on the node kind of areas. So it's an interesting thought. It's a little different than our existing zoning, which is kind of more blocky.
Yep.
So
yeah, and it's important. It's difficult when sort of definitionally an intersection has 4 properties at the intersection. So defining every intersection as a node is, defining very specific properties as being regulated in very specific ways. So there is a balancing act that has to happen there. Some of it could be in how things are defined, but there's, as we've been talking about, there's a lot of sliders in here about, this is a little bit defined a little bit differently this way or a little differently that way. And, figure out how it works and maybe it's tweaking the boundaries of the existing zoning districts that, the MSN scale, the medium scale neighborhood creeps up a little bit into sort of the next intersection that's in the lower scale area. to allow those things in that instead of it being like isolated dots. But yeah, that's further conversation along the same lines.
This one doesn't really appear here, and I don't really know how it fits in, but the whole idea of having commuter parking, transit center,
Mhm.
it seems like that sort of thing needs to happen kind of on the outskirts more of the city.
Yeah.
How do you, parking garage or just parking facilities that are just for commuters? It's like that we're not really addressing that, are we?
No, partially because that would fall more in that public and quasi-public realm. Like there can be private facilities that are just a private parking garage that people pay to use. But it's more along that sort of infrastructure line of things. So it wasn't necessarily part of this exercise,
Yeah.
but it is something to consider.
Yeah, because it's like every time we've sort of thought about that whole idea of having collection points, it's like, where on earth would you put them?
Mhm.
And the only one I could ever think of is like the cider mill. And they have so little parking. They don't even have enough parking for them. But that would be such a perfect place to have like, a place where a bus or a small van or something could do a collection route, in different places and provide transit for an area that's just not served at all. And yet it's a great collecting point because you could buy your groceries and then hop in your car and go home.
Well, there's a couple acres for sale behind it.
That's
Ah.
true.
Oh, there you go.
There are.
Maybe the city ought to swap that up instead of building.
Yeah. Bargain.
Was there anything else on this? I mean, this was a.
No, it was, I wanted to check in with all of you about sort of where my thinking has been going with this. I kind of came at it from I came at it initially from taking the uses that we have, like all of this, and trying to combine them in different ways, and that it made sense for about half of them, and for the other half it didn't, and that's when I moved forward to flipping it around and approaching it from the front end of not collecting what we have, but sort of throwing it out and starting over. And we will end up needing to define reasonably well what old uses fit into what new use types, especially so that we just don't have everything in the city be a non-conformity all overnight. Which, because Marla would kill me if I did that. So that's something that we will need to do down the path, but thinking of it in this framework, I think it was much cleaner than doing it the other way. So, coming attractions, you'll sort of see the next level of work on this. Likely, well, that will be in January because your December 10th meeting is primarily form-based code and your approval of the UPWP. So you'll have a little bit of time, and I'll have a little bit of time to get you something really good at a January meeting.
Right.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay, so there's no minutes, so other business, so it's true, we don't have a Christmas meeting.
Correct.
So we have one meeting December 10th,
Yep.
and then we're into January. Any other business? Other business?
Nope. Not for
Okay,
me.
then we are adjourned. Thanks,
When
everyone.
is the meeting in January?
The meetings in January should be
Tuesday.
the
Or the
fourth,
sixth
the
of the-
14th and 28th.
Oh, that's it, 7, okay,
It's the latest it can be in January.
okay. Good, all right.
Thanksgiving.